minister at Stonegate Fellowship, and he's going to do the invocation. He oversees all of the groups and all of the communities, the growing communities there at Stonegate, and so just going to let him do the invocation. Thank you.
Let's pray together. Thank you, Lord, for the beauty of this day specifically. Thank you, Lord, for the community that's even in this room, and for these good people that we are blessed to just live and serve together. Thank you for the area that we are delighted to live in. Thank you for your blessings on us. Thank you, Lord, for just being so good to us in every way. Lord, I want to thank you for the treat of this wonderful meal and for the time to be challenged and encouraged. Thank you for friendship and just smiling on our community the way you do. We love you this day and thankful for all you do for us. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
First, start off with reminders that June 11th, we've got Summer Mummers, and tickets are available on the website if you want to do that. It's a pretty fun event. We kind of booked the front half of the thing, and if anyone's been there before, you know how that goes. So, and then it's time to finally announce the official 2021-2022 board, starting with our first vice president. Austin, if you'll stand up when you're through chewing. Austin Kinsler, give him a big congrats. And second vice president, Corey Willett, if she's here. I don't think she made it. And then our treasurer, Zach Smith. Secretary, Chase Ragsdale. Chase in here. Our clay shoot directors, Gareth Brewer and Josh Anderson. They're not here either. Golf tournament, Justin Bone and Eric Eves. Newsletter, Katie McBride. Absent as well. And then education seminar, Danielle Jeter. Didn't see her either. Christmas and shrimp boil party, Chris Harrell. Fundraising and charities and scholarships, Dustin Rucker. Either. And then our directors at large, Randus Butts. And Jason South. Jason's not here either. Okay. Our AAPL director is Clay Whitehead. Also not here. And then, of course, current and now past president, or about to be past president, Tip Kerwin. And Tip, while you're here, if you'll come here. You won't need your glasses. I'm not going to make you read. Just we wanted to say thank you. And Tip had a special year as president dealing with the COVID and all that. And so we got you a little something just to appreciate.
That's why you're asking where to get the trophies from. Molly, well, that's really nice. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
And then Will Porter. I hope he's here. I thought I saw him earlier. Will, if you'll stand up. Will's been a member since 1984, and he's been on the board since 88 to present with a few years off. We couldn't do the math or so many years or try to figure it all out. But we also just wanted to say thank you and got you an award, and just to show our appreciation. And then another long goer who's been on the board for 13 years and been a member since probably about the same time as Will, early 80s, Danny Kidwell. No, what's it? 1980. So please stand up. Thank you. No, there's supposed to be a base, but Molly's got it.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. And then Tip, if you want to introduce the speaker now.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate y'all coming to our in-person Zoom meeting. That was really, really cool. And look forward to having the new board. It's going to be great. And really enjoyed serving you guys. Thank you, Kyle. That was really cool. I think Nash made a good comment, and he said some of these invocations are so good he feels like clapping. This is pretty neat. Let's see. I want to talk about Jeffrey Smith. His topic is the climatology crisis, the answer that can't be questioned. Think about that for a second. We're not allowed to question anything. And when I went to school in Midland High School back in the 40s, we were taught to question everything. Jeff, he attended Union College. Oh, also we have Chris Moore. Stand up, please. She's with KCRS Morning Drive, and we're privileged to have her attending. And so this is kind of neat that we've got Chris here. Jeff went to Union College, Schenectady, New York. He earned a BS in geology in 1968. He received the Robert M. Brady Award in 1967, the high grade point average junior geology major, the Edward S.C. Smith Award, 1968, high grade point average senior geology major. He received his Master's of Science in Geology from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I hope I said that right. From Troy, New York in 1970. His thesis was on petrography and sedimentology of Catskill Delta sands. His thesis advisor was Gerald M. Friedman. I'm guessing he must be a famous geologist. I asked Jeff if he could turn his level of intelligence down from a 78 to a 33 so we can catch on to what he's talking about. If you talk to him about one little thing, he can talk to you about anything for a long time. Jeff came to Midland from New York in 1970 to work for Mobil Oil. Jeff worked for several different oil companies, and since 1998, he's been a well site consultant for various entities, and that's a very condensed version of all that he's done out here. He's been really active in charities, and we'll talk about that later. So right now, Jeff, you have the floor, and we're privileged to have Jeff Smith.
All right, thank you very much. And I didn't know all that stuff was on there about awards and things. I didn't intend for that to be there. So I might take the oxygen off. If I do, and I get hypoxic and I collapse, they say mouth-to-mouth resuscitation works, but ladies first. So. Yeah, when I was talking to Tip about this, I didn't want to put in all the bio stuff. I've been a consultant for a long time because, see, as a consultant, you can make a lot of money for doing almost nothing. And I've been on drilling rigs all over the place for a long time. Before that, when I first came here, And as he said, it was interesting. Most of us who went to Rensselaer can't spell it or pronounce it. So. But the signature that's on my master's degree is John Redfern, who was a very prominent oil man in Midland. And the Redfern family got me involved in a lot of charitable operations. And his daughter Robin and I were on the original board when they started Big Brothers Big Sisters here. And I stayed involved in that for a long time. And then, of course, if you're involved in something, then they find, oh, here's somebody who will do something, so then everybody wants you. So then I was on a jillion boards. And that's what I did in my 20s and my 30s. And then the oil industry collapsed, and I suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. And so in my 40s, I said, okay, I'm just going to focus on 2 places. And so I spent all my time and all my money at those 2 places, the bar and Riley's. And when I turned 50, I decided to choose sanity and sobriety. And I've been involved in a number of charities since then. And one that I want to quickly mention today, and some of you have probably seen it, it's Thriving United. And Pat Brown, great philanthropist, is the one who has started all this, and he asked me to be on his board, and I'm so honored that he asked me. There was a special on Channel 7 last week, a 1-hour special about Thriving United, and we have all kinds of things going on for people who suffer from alcohol problems, from drug problems, from emotional problems. We're trying to have places for people like women to live with their kids when they're in recovery, and we just have a lot going on. And it's a great program, and the little documentary they did, which was on last week, and he and Dusty Hicks was also real involved in it. It's on YouTube, and it's called Dance with a Gorilla. And if you want to see it, YouTube Dance with a Gorilla. Now, the way I got involved in really looking at climate science was almost an embarrassment. There was a real brilliant geologist who lived in Midland named Don Magucci, and a number of you may be familiar with him. He wrote a great book called Geologic Wonders in West Texas. It's on sale at the Petroleum Museum, and it's 8.5 by 11. It's like a coffee table book. And he and I were walking in together to hear a talk at Midland Country Club, a SIPES meeting, by a professor from University of Georgia, whose specialty was glaciology. Now, I've always been real involved in all the environmental organizations. And so I was falling for a lot of it. And we were walking in, and I said something about it, and Magucci grabbed me by the arm and yanked me, just about ripped my arm out of the socket. He goes, "I can't believe you believe this stuff." He said, "You should be ashamed of yourself. You're a geologist." I was shocked. And I heard this talk, and this professor showed all the data that they had from millions of years of ice core data. And it just totally opened my eyes. And I really started studying it. And I had actually had meteorology when I was in junior high school. When I was a junior high in a little Cowtown area in upstate New York, they decided to do something real different. They took what they thought were the 6 top students. From 7th grade on, we all studied together in all kinds of advanced classes. And because it was in the 50s, there were no women, because of course women weren't advanced in the 50s and 60s. So, but I had meteorology, I had geology, I had all kinds of things. And I went back and I started thinking about all those things. Now I will have to tell you that, I mean, if I'd been here a couple of years ago, I probably would have been condescending and patronizing, but I got a real comeuppance. There's a top-notch petroleum engineer named Dilbert, and he was sitting at his desk working something very complex on his computer, because that's what engineers always do, or at least that's what they always say they're doing. And a coworker on the other side of the table, he said, Dilbert, I'm really sick of being a landman. Can you help me out? Can you train me to be an engineer? And Dilbert said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that. He said, your brain lacks the necessary circuitry. And the landman just looked so sad. And he said, well, wait a minute, you think I could be a geologist? And Dilbert said, piece of cake, that's just liquor and guessing. So I had to grab some humility when I saw that. So, but I'm amazed I made it anyway, because for all my formative years, I drank water that was transported and delivered through lead pipes. And in school, we played with mercury, and they let us do it. So I'm shocked I'm still alive. I have to tell you, I love science. I have always loved science. And I felt like it was just a total affront to everything scientific. The more I delved into this and saw the things that were going on and the things that were being said, I got a call last night from the Environmental Defense Fund telling me they really needed help because in the greatest big oil field, the Permian Basin, all kinds of methane was being released into the atmosphere because people were flaring it. I don't think they've ever heard of oxidation. Methane and oxygen on fire. It's no longer methane. But there's nobody on TV that seems to know that either. Yeah. And methane is so huge in the atmosphere. It's 2 parts per million. It has no effect. If I put a little test together and gave it to people in Congress, I don't know if anybody could pass it. 95% of greenhouse gas is water vapor. The other 5% is carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone. The ice core data has shown over and over and over that carbon dioxide does not drive the climate. It rides it. There is 50 times more carbon dioxide in the oceans than there is in the atmosphere. But when you go into a warm cycle, it takes about 800 years to warm the oceans because they're pretty big. And as they get warm, they exsolve or release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. When they get cold, they reabsorb it. Real simple scientific test. Take 2 carbonated beverages. Carbonated means it's got CO2. Put it in your refrigerator, nice and cold. Take them out, pop them, put one back in the refrigerator, leave the other one on the counter, and 12 hours later, see which one still has carbonation. The one in the refrigerator retains most of it, the one on the counter doesn't have any, because as it warms up, it's gone. The things I see on TV news absolutely shock me. And I have followed so many of the top scientists, and they never get asked to be on TV. One, and I gave a list, one was Freeman Dyson, and he died a year ago. At age 95, he was considered the world's most brilliant scientist, a physicist who worked with Einstein at Princeton. Supposedly, actually even solved a few things that Einstein didn't. I read a biography of Freeman Dyson. That's how I got hooked. And he belonged to this group, this exalted group with these people who had like 200 IQs that would meet out in La Jolla, California. And it was engineers, scientists, mathematicians, and they would discuss the things they were working on. And this guy that was being interviewed said, let me tell you how smart that man is. He said, the world's top mathematician is one of our people. And he told us that he was working on developing an algorithm that would predict number sequences where if you took a number and you switched the first and last digits, the new number was exactly double the original number. He said Dyson thought for like 3 seconds, went, oh, I got one. And it was 9 digits long. And he said the rest of us are sitting there with 200 IQs going, this guy's really smart. Freeman Dyson studied all of this. When Barack Obama signed us into the Paris Climate Accord without submitting it to the Senate as a treaty, I saw an interview with Freeman Dyson. He said, I'm a lifelong Democrat and I love Obama, and it's causing me great pain to have to admit that the Republicans are right about climate change. He had some other talks. Wonderful man, totally humble, brilliant man. One of the original IPAC, or IPCC people, when they said they had 2,500 of the world's best scientists, well, it was Richard Lindzen. He was chairman of the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at MIT. He said, no, there were 40 of us and 2,460 bureaucrats. And he said, every time we scientists came up with anything, they gave it to people from the World Wildlife Federation or another environmental group, and they either ignored it or rewrote it. He said, it's the biggest scientific scam I've seen in my entire life. I think a guy who's chairman of that department at MIT might actually know something. Also in Massachusetts, at Harvard, Willie Soon, solar physicist, a lot of talks. You can go to online and see him too. He is just furious about all of this like I am, and he knows a whole lot more of it than I do. There are scientists from all around the world who say, what a scam this is, now horrible. And they kept going on about global warming. Well, it quit getting warm. So they did two things. One is they changed the name to climate change, and then they changed it to climate crisis and climate emergency, and none of that is true. In the last 10,000 years, and this was something that they tried to do at the UN, they tried to wipe it out for 10,000 years and say, just totally flat, and then do the hockey stick like Michael Mann's paper. Now, Michael Mann was also he was a professor of geology that nobody knew of. But he created that, and now he's famous all over the place and on TV all the time. Now he's this great climate scientist from Penn State because he came up with a hockey stick. That was all fake. He used tree ring data, which didn't work at all. Another scientist did the same thing at the same time, a guy named Keith Briffa. His went the other way, and the UN decided, oh, they couldn't use that, so it was called, when they had their emails hacked, it was called hide the decline. Now, some of you may have known about that. It was called ClimateGate. All these UN scientists had the ones who were backed by the UN, they had their emails hacked. Now, New York Times, Washington Post, and a number of other papers said they were going to pay no attention to them whatsoever because they were purloined. And I said, boy, the Koch brothers are going to be sitting here going, we're safe, we're safe. So I read those emails. So did a lot of other scientists. We were shocked at how these guys have been scheming. They'd been threatening the editors of the scientific journals. They've allowed anybody to publish who wasn't on board with the dogma that they'd get them kicked out of their editorships. They were saying how they had to get rid of all the things we knew from the last couple, 10,000 years, that we had to do the flat. Well, let me tell you what's happened in the last 10,000 years. When the Pleistocene Ice Age ended, we had almost 4,000 years of very warm temperatures. It was called the Holocene Climatic Optimum, HCO. And then we went into a real cold phase for a while. And then we came back into a couple thousand years ago, like 3,000 years ago, the Minoan warm period, which was also known as the Greek warm period. That's when civilizations flourish, is when it's warm. Then it was another cold period, and 2,000 years ago was the Roman warm period. And these are periods that are warm or warmer than we are now. Then another cold period. Then 1,000 years ago was the medieval warm period, which we have much more data for. And that's also when we went into, right after that, the age of enlightenment. And the medieval warm period, they were farming on Greenland, and they had grape vineyards in northern Scotland, which they don't have now, because they won't live there now. It was warmer than now, but they had to figure out ways to get rid of that. But then in the early 1300s, we went into what's known as the LIA, the Little Ice Age. And we had over 500 years of extremely cold temperature. Books that I had read about the plague, which I read a long time ago, the authors had said, well, probably most of those people who supposedly died from the plague actually died from starvation because none of their plants would grow. Well, when it got that cold, not only did you have a short growing season, but the oceans had absorbed so much carbon dioxide, it was hard, and it's plant food, and there was hardly any carbon dioxide available in the air, just barely enough for plants to grow. And people perished by the millions during the LIA. The 1800s, mid-1800s, really started warming up. Had a huge warm streak. Then another cold one. Then, more recent, the 1920s and 30s. And almost every single temperature record out there was set in the 1930s. Went into real cold. Started getting cold in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. I grew up there outside of Hyde Park, New York. We'd get our parents to drive us down to the Hudson River so we could watch the icebreakers leading ships up the Hudson River, which is actually an estuary. It's got a strong tide for 150 miles. But the ice would be 4 to 5 feet thick. That's how cold it was. And all the climatologists in the world, which I think there were like 3 of them back then, because the government wasn't paying for it, were saying, and it was in Time magazine, Life magazine, that we were going into a new ice age because it was so cold. And then all of a sudden we started to get warm. And it really got warm, culminating in 1998 with a very strong El Nino. Now, what I started learning, the more I studied, was that on the decadal scales, it's mostly the ocean currents, or the ocean cycles, I should say. The PDO, Pacific Decadal Oscillation, really dominates, and it typically lasts for 15 to 25 years. Now, right now, I think it's still in a negative phase and has been since 1999. And you can tell when the Pacific Ocean's in a negative phase because it causes the jet stream to do big north-south loops. And I've been seeing that in the jet stream for a long time. That's why sometimes you look, and we're on the north side of a loop, and Anchorage is on the south side of a loop, and we're colder than they are, because they're on the south side, on a warm side of a loop. The Atlantic Ocean also goes through cycles, and it's called the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, which typically lasts 25 to 44 years. And what we've been in for a long time is that the Pacific Ocean is in a negative phase and the Atlantic is still in a warm phase. When they're in a warm phase together, like the 20s and the 30s, we can get really warm. Really cold stuff that went on there in the 50s and 60s and up through most of the 70s, they were both in a negative phase. Now there are also a Northern Atlantic oscillation, there's an Arctic oscillation, there are a lot of them. But those 2 big ones, the PDO and the AMO, really control greatly for the decadal oscillations. But we have solar cycles. And this wasn't accepted for a long time. But during the LIA, the Little Ice Age, there were 2 astronomers, Dalton and Maunder, who had noted in their records that there were no sunspots. The sun doesn't change the amount of heat that it sends us, but the sunspots are responsible for electromagnetic radiation. And when there's no sunspots, the radiation is dimmed. And it allows cosmic radiation to come in from outer space. And what they have learned is that that cosmic radiation, that it reacts with water vapor, with water molecules in the stratosphere and creates clouds. And the clouds cool us. We all know that. You go out on a cloudy day, it's cooler. Go out on a cloudy night, it's warmer because it insulates. But the albedo effect, so much of the sun that hits the clouds doesn't make it to us because it reflects back into space. And that theory wasn't well understood or well accepted, but it is now, because the empirical data is there. And science is supposed to be about empiricism. And what you're hearing all the time on TV is nothing about empiricism. It's all political. We had the huge freeze here. Who did CNN have on for their special guy? Bill Gates. Yeah, Bill Gates. Yeah, he's talked about how cows are responsible for 4% of all methane. Complete nonsense. Total nonsense. There's hardly any methane out there anyway, and most of it comes from cracks in the seafloor and cracks in the rocks. It was like a few years ago that Hollywood loved it when they had the movie Gasland, which was all fake. Yes, people had gas in their water. They'd always had it because their water zones were sitting right on top of coal beds, and the gas came from coal beds. I did research for Shell Oil Company in Colorado in the late 1960s. Summer job. It was a great summer job. I was in areas that there wasn't a well within 100 miles. People would go in a cafe, what do you do? I tell them, they go, oh, talk to so-and-so. He's got so much gas in his water, he uses it to heat his house. They had a lot of coal, and that's where the gas came from. You know, there are programs that I used to think were so worth my time, like 60 Minutes. And I've gotten so disappointed in things they're doing now. And they were showing video from China and showing coal-fired power plants and trying to make the audience think that those were, you know, plants that were petrochemical and breaking out, creating gas. China doesn't have oil and gas. They looked and looked. They don't have it. They're burning coal. They've been buying natural gas from Indonesia and paying $15.40 an MCF, which they nobody could afford. So they went to all coal, and they're going to all electric vehicles because they can generate electricity burning coal. That for a while, China had been building 2 coal-fired power plants per week. Now I think they're down to 1, and they're using an older technology. They're not using scrubbers, and so their skies are horrendous. But it's not because of oil or gas. 60 Minutes conflated and said, oh yeah, tried to make it look like it was because of oil and gas and said how they were so far ahead of us. No, they're not. Now China does make an awful lot of wind and solar because they can sell it to stupid people like us. One of the dumbest things I ever saw, in the North Sea, now, there's an awful lot of production platforms. And you guys all know, around here, you have a big production facility. You're going to be producing oil, associated gas, water. So you have separators. And you use the separators to separate out those products. And you send the gas down one pipeline, the oil down another one, and water off someplace else. And what they were doing on those big platforms out in the North Sea was using some of that natural gas to run generators to create the electricity that they needed on the platform, which is a very small amount. It'd be a little bit more than you'd need in this room, but not much. But that was considered in Europe as really harming the climate, to burn that little tiny bit of natural gas. So at unbelievable expense, they built gigantic wind turbines out into these offshore, out in the water, and then ran cable, electric cable across the floor, seafloor. And so now those platforms are now running on electricity that's wind generated. And I thought, when I saw that, how can anybody be that stupid? Because that's the only way you can describe that. But I'm beginning to think that we didn't want them to be alone when they raced to the bottom. So we're trying to join them. Saw an article in the New York Times about 6 years ago. I didn't keep all the data, but I was shocked. And the New York Times, as you all know, is very liberal. They're not conservative. And They had an article about the true cost of generating electricity. Now, the amount, and I think the amount was for like a megawatt hour. And the cost of solar was so expensive, I didn't even remember it. It was unbelievable. But wind, I remember. Wind was $56 of taxpayer subsidy, and they said that, of taxpayer subsidy to generate that amount of electricity. Fossil fuels was 62 cents of private money. 62 cents of private money, $56 of subsidy, and the solar was about 3 times more than the wind. What are we building all over this country? And we are governed by bureaucracies. It's a metastatic bureaucracy. I know the last president, President Trump, he was not in favor of this stuff, but it happened anyway. Trillions of dollars was being spent on wind and solar because the bureaucracies govern us. And it's going to get worse. My electric bill at my house here just about doubled when we went to wind because we have 3 gas-fired power plants on the south side of Odessa that were supposed to be generating our electricity. I was one of the consultants that was out helping them drill wells. They wanted lower BTU gas, so we were drilling wells in the Yates Formation. They all got mothballed. They all got set aside so we could take all that wind power. It's a disaster. My cousin from Connecticut called me the other day and said that Connecticut just told them they're going to be going to all wind. I'm shocked. I am. But another thing from the media, a few years ago, a physicist from the People's Republic of Berkeley, Robert Mueller, came out and said he had always been a skeptic. But he had just completed a major study that showed that the Earth was absolutely warming, and warming because of human carbon dioxide emissions. So the New York Times, Washington Post, I mean, they all went crazy about this. And they pulled that paper up. I did too. And just you can see just in the abstract in the front that that wasn't what he studied. Also, it listed his co-author, Judith Curry. Now, Judith is a great scientist, and she was chairman of the Department of Atmospheric and Geosciences at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Now, the guy who was running all this at the Washington Post, Seth Borenstein, he called her, and she said, "This isn't what we studied. This is untrue." New York Times called her too. They never mentioned her in any of their stories about this. They kept going on and on about this great physicist and what he had proven. They never even mentioned her name. Unbelievable. I had no idea that the media could be that corrupt. I mean, I miss Walter Cronkite. I'm just constantly shocked at the things that I see. And all of those cycles, just in the last 10,000 years, of the Holocene climatic optimum, the Younger Dryas, the Minoan, the Roman, the medieval warm period, the Little Ice Age. But now Noah is always saying everything's setting new records. Well, one of the things they did, and James Hansen did this, of course he's famous now too. James Hansen was an astronomer at NASA, and he ran GISS, Goddard Institute of Space Science. And GISS is where all of the archived temperature records are kept. He went into the 1930s and subtracted 2 degrees and added it to some later decades. But now he's famous and gets invited to all these big climate confabs all around the world. And yeah, he's famous now. But he called it, normalization and modernization, but he subtracted 2 degrees off the hottest decade. But nobody on TV has ever mentioned these things. Unbelievable. And it's so hard to ever even challenge any of these things. And that was like the subtitle of my talk. And that comes from a famous physicist named Richard Feynman. A brilliant, brilliant man. Wrote a great book that I read a long time ago. And he said, in science, we can accept questions that we can't answer, but we should never accept an answer that we can't question. And that's what's going on in climate science. And that's why I said it's not a climate crisis, it's a climatology crisis. The crisis is in the so-called study of the climate. The amount of money being poured into all of these things from not only environmental organizations, but government bureaucracies. Everybody's always trying to support their own job and mission creep. Give you a perfect example. And I've said this to lots of people in the oil patch, and they didn't even know it. You go down here to the Gulf Coast. You go out to, I guess, what is it, 12 miles, it's state waters, and after that it's federal. So you find a field out there, you drill a well in the state waters, and you have 75 different sandstones. It's one well. Go 2 miles away and drill it in the federal waters, it's 75 wells. I went to the API website some years ago when they were talking about all the thousands and thousands of wells that the Minerals Management Service had to look after. I'm like, there aren't that many wells out there. Well, right, every single sandstone layer is counted as a well. But every government bureaucracy is just about that fake. That's how they do things. It's like all these so-called studies about the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and how the reef is dying. Well, it's a few thousand square miles, and a whole bunch of scientists who wanted to have a nice vacation, you know, during a little time off, they get government grants, and they go down there, and in Australia, they've taken and little tiny charts off, blocked them off, and assigned them, and they're making a lot of money on this, Australian government and Australian universities. And so they're assigning these to people. And so they go spend a nice time there and study it. Now coral is an animal. It's not a plant. It's an animal. And animals die. And if they, in a whole area of several square miles, they could find one piece of coral that was white, meant it was bleached, probably dead, they click that off. So then they could say, well, 97% of the reef is dying. Well, a little bit of it is, but the reef's actually in really good shape. And the scientists at these universities in Australia, they were livid about this and started going out and talking about it. They got fired. They've lost their positions. But then, of course, the University of Queensland in Australia, they did a famous study and came out with that 97% of all scientists support the man-made global warming. And John Kerry, that famous scientist, he went crazy over it. So that other one, Bernie Sanders, and they went crazy over it. And it turned out what they actually did, they created a word search algorithm. They went through all the scientific literature, and even cherry-picked a lot of that, and just looked at the abstract. They didn't look at the introduction, they didn't look at the conclusions. If certain words were there, it was considered that the author was a warmist. Well, there were only a few people that were allowed to even publish that weren't warmists, but they got counted as being warmists, and some of them sued, said, get my name off of there. That had no accuracy whatsoever, none. The same words would be used whether you're warmist or skeptic, the same words are going to be there. But they used that and said it was proving that 97%. There's actually only been one ever survey that I'm aware of. And it was done at a convention in New Orleans of board certified meteorologists. And it was a number of years back, about 9 or 10 years ago. And the majority voted against the global warming theories. And there were people who suggested that they should lose their certifications until they went back to school and got re-educated. So that fortunately didn't fly. But I listed a number of scientists that can be checked out. And also a website that I love, and he's an historian. John Robson. He's an historian in Canada. And he kept hearing all the time, just like we all do, that everything is historic and unprecedented. No. So he started really studying it and found out how fake it all was. And he's got a great website, and he does like 10 to 15-minute long talks every week. And he has a really good sense of humor, and I love watching his stuff. I also saw another one here recently. It was a Nobel Prize winning physicist. And I can't remember his name, but he was from an Eastern European immigrant. And like a lot of people from the Eastern European area, he had like 9 or 10 consonants in a row in his name without a vowel, because I think C's and J's and Z's are vowels over there. You know. And he was asked to look at all the temperature data coming out from our government. And he started out, he said, "This is not my area of expertise," but he said, "I'm shocked." He said, "Let me just tell you the truth." Excuse my language. He said, "They're putting out bullshit numbers." And he was speaking to a whole audience of scientists, and he showed NOAA has gotten rid of 95% of our temperature recording stations. They only kept the 5% that read the hottest temperatures, which are almost all inside of cities. We have a pronounced urban heat island effect, which when I finally got a modern car that you could look on the dashboard and see ambient temperatures, and I might leave my house at 3 or 4 in the morning to drive to a rig over by Orla or someplace, and it'd be 45 degrees in my driving down the street by my house. Get out to Sam's, it'd be 37 degrees. The minute you got out of the city, the temperature, we have a pronounced urban heat island effect. And that was the only ones that NOAA kept. Now they could be using satellite data and weather balloon data, because they have a lot of that. They just don't report it. So they're reporting what they want to report, which is showing all these record high temperatures that aren't real. I used to always have a garden in my backyard. I would go to Fredericksburg, go to the herb farm, and I used to love to have that stuff. And back there in the late 90s, when it really was getting hot, I had some years that my tomatoes were still alive after New Year's. We hadn't had a killing frost. That hadn't happened in a long time. You know, in recent years, we probably got 35 killing frosts by the time we get to the first of the year. But they still say everything's always the hottest. It's the hottest, it's the driest. Let me tell you about the fires in California. 1987, I signed on. There was an attorney in California who had drilled 7 straight dry holes. Somebody gave him my name. I was just getting ready to go to law school down in Austin. And he called me and asked me not to go. He said, "I want you to run my oil company." So I went to California to meet with him. And he wanted me to see their new home. He was an attorney. His wife was a doctor. And they had 3 young daughters. And I got up there. This was 1987. I remember right now exactly what it looked like. I was shocked. As California's population soared, they went from down here to up here, not into the mountains, up into the foothills, which were highly dissected plateaus in the chaparral country, because it's very dry. The chaparral, those are plants that are full of resin, because it helps them save their water through non-transpiration. And I was shocked. And then they're wired, and I said, "It's a brand new expensive area." I said, "Why isn't your electricity underground?" "Oh, they didn't want to spend the money for that." And even in the light breeze, you see the wires doing this. And I told them they had to get out of there. This whole area was going to burn up. And the only thing that really grows really good for landscaping in an area like that are pine trees, because they'll grow real well in dry climate, dry soil. He and his wife listened to me, and they got the hell out of there. Now, I don't understand why Governor Moonbeam didn't know that, and a few other people out there. And when they had the big fires, I think they were filing lawsuits against PG&E, claiming that their wires had started 34 of the fires. Well, why did their wires start 34 of the fires? What was all along underneath those wires? They never even cleaned those areas out. I have a house outside in the woods outside of Ruidosa. They come out and inspect us all the time. We have to make sure that there's nothing around our wires, and that there's no brush on the ground, and there's no long grass. They didn't do that in California. They didn't do any of that. Now, I did see a really nice discussion about it. I don't know if it was MSNBC or CNN, but it was a real nice discussion. And they had all their usual people who didn't know anything. And then they had a lady who was a professor of forest fire science at University of Colorado at Boulder. And they all kept talking about emissions, and she kept saying, no, it's not emissions, it's ignitions. This is all because of human ignitions. And she tried to explain to them the same thing happened in the mid-1800s on the East Coast, when people moved from the coastlines up into the higher areas. And I used to see all the big burn scars, like up in the Adirondack Mountains and other places where those fires had occurred. People had moved out of the lowlands up into the highlands and started fires, usually by accident, you know? But she kept trying to say human ignitions. I guarantee you they'll never have her on TV again, because she didn't say emissions. But I'm so glad that my friends moved, because they may have burned to death if they hadn't. These things just shock me. They really do. They shock me. So, and we see it over and over again. During our great freeze, and I've been watching the Weather Channel quite a bit, and it's owned by NBC, and they'd been predicting that this monster freeze was going to hit us, and that our wind turbines were very likely not to function. And my wife went out to shop. She said, what should I get? I said, get a couple of boxes of the big fake fire logs, because we got a fireplace. I said, at least we can keep the house warm that way. And a few other things. But then over on MSNBC, which is also NBC, they said that Governor Abbott was a liar for saying that the wind turbines froze up. On the Weather Channel, they were showing videos of the helicopters hovering over them, trying to spray de-icer on them so they could get them working again. So two NBC channels with completely different stories. I thought that was very ironic and sad. And that's what we deal with these days. So I'll watch TV, but I don't trust any of them. There's a man died here recently, and he'd become a friend of mine, Walter Mondale. I'm part of a group here in Midland that for 18, 19 years we went fishing in Alaska at Kodiak Island. And Walter Mondale and his son and some other people, they were there usually at the same time. We all stayed at the little Kodiak Inn there in Kodiak and all became friends. And yeah, he asked me one time, he said, where do you get your news and your views? And back then, I told him I usually read 2 to 3 newspapers every day, and a few science magazines and U.S. News and World Report. And he said, well, all right, well, what about TV news? I said, I'll watch them, but I don't trust them. He goes, why? I said, because anytime they're talking about an issue that I know a lot about, I know they don't. So if they're talking about an issue I don't know anything about, I assume they still don't. And he said, well, so which one would you watch? I said, well, I'll turn the sound off and I'll scan them. And if they have women that I find really attractive, I stop and watch. And he started pointing at me. He said, that's the best one I've ever heard. Can I steal it? I want to steal that. And every year when he'd see me up there, he'd point at me and start laughing, you know. really, really nice guy. So I'm sorry that he passed away. He was 93. But we all shared fishing stuff all the time. Like, where'd you guys go today? Where'd you guys go? And we'd share information with each other about where our boat went and what we caught. So we had all got to be pretty good friends. He was a really good man. But I did try to talk to he and his son about climate change. They didn't believe me. But they asked me, and then they didn't believe me. But that's all right. But I am just shocked at how fake all of this is. And carbon dioxide, it doesn't control the climate. It never has. It adds a little tiny bit. A little bit, it does. But hardly anything. Even the UN IPCC, and by the way, I did see a tape one time. The lady who was running most of this for the UN was secretly taped while she was speaking to some big poobahs from environmental organizations. And she said, well, the science might be wrong, but this is really the best chance we have to get rid of capitalism. And I saw that tape. So the UN, there's people who want this for political reasons. There's people who want this because they're really stupid and don't know any better. And there's people who want this because they want centralized control, because that has worked so well in Cuba and Venezuela and the Soviet Union. And it's just worked wonderful. And those are the things that are going on these days. And the bureaucracy just sits there and does whatever they want. But the universities in this country are very culpable. The two schools I went to, they're both small, private, very expensive schools. I was on scholarships, okay? I was the only person in my whole family who had ever gone to college. My father was the youngest of 7 brothers, and his father was killed in an accident just before he was born. In those days, you could make it. My father, when he died, was the president of the Austin Society of Quality Control Engineers, and he'd been a high school dropout. You can't do those things anymore. But these colleges, Rensselaer was first school in the country to really focus on geology. The USGS was founded by a Rensselaer graduate. All the state societies were founded by Rensselaer graduates. They sent out this great big deal last year. They got a huge government grant to study the effect of lakes on climate change. Give me a break. Anything where they can get money. I've heard some recent geologic talks where these professor from Texas Tech, professor from Colorado School of Mines, talking about how they got a government grant to study the potential of carbon sequestration in the Bone Springs Formation in the basin. Come on. The government will throw you money like crazy if you're going to be on the carbon side. Yep. Another scientist I love is Patrick Moore. Unbelievably brave man, co-founder of Greenpeace. These were the guys who were out there in those little Zodiacs in the middle of the ocean trying to get between Russian whaling fleets and whales, trying to save the lives of whales. And these guys, unbelievably brave. And he's a PhD in environmental sciences. He dropped out of Greenpeace because he said the environmental movement has gone crazy. He does real talks that you can pull up on YouTube about the true nature of carbon dioxide, the science, the real science. But I saw them blasting him on MSNBC. Well, we called Greenpeace. He's not even a member. I think they could have Googled it in 30 seconds, found out he was a founding member. And they said, oh, and he says carbon. We never say carbon. We say carbon dioxide. That was the first time I ever heard anybody in the network say carbon dioxide. They always say carbon. I guess they want us to think about diamonds. I don't know. Pretty amazing what goes on out there. If you've got, what the environmental organizations have all said for a long time, that they were going to really focus on the kids. Because they know that most older people, we can remember. Remember, I remember, because I'm older than most of you, probably all of you. 1969, my last winter in New York. we had one of those gigantic blizzards that covered all over the place. In recent years, they called it Snowmageddon. And Barack Obama had Al Roker come to the White House and say it was because of climate change and carbon dioxide. It was cyclical, but we had it in 1969. It took months before they could even get the streets open in most cities. They were only one lane. Everything had to go to one way because it was like you're driving down a tunnel. The snow was so deep. It was late 59 or 60. I went to a junior high school that was one story. It was about 10 feet up to the roof. We were walking up the snow to the roof. We also had lots of times that, since we were out in a rural area, that temperatures would go down to minus 25 or minus 30, that school buses wouldn't start, so school would get called off. And when school got called off, we were kids, so we got and play. Nothing's changed. We're having that all over again. It snowed 2 days ago in Ohio on Mother's Day. It snowed 1.5 feet just west of Denver yesterday and last night. I guess it's time to go.
This is part one, right? And then you come back next fall?
And you all did check your weapons at the door, right? Yeah. So, good. I appreciate your patience in listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Now he's blown the answer away, and that's really cool. So this will be on our website, and I encourage everybody that is interested in all of this, which I think we should be. We agree on that. To maybe send that around and possibly send it to our friends at NBC and the Weather Channel and MSNBC and so forth. On behalf of the PBLA, we're proud to donate to Jeff's favorite charity, Thriving United, which he talked about previously. That was fantastic. It's been a pleasure serving all of y'all, and thanks for coming. And we'll see you at the Summer Members. And I'll be the guy with the bag on my face. Y'all have fun. See you later. Thanks a bunch.